Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Productive Mind podcast. My name is Andrew.
And my name is Shyam.
As college students and young professionals, we're constantly juggling academics, careers, relationships, and our own expectations. But in the middle of all of that, we often forget something crucial. Are we actually filling our own cup? Today's conversation is about just that: how to replenish yourself, how to lead a fulfilling lifestyle, and how to navigate life's biggest challenges without losing who you are.
Before we get started, we're going to highlight one productivity tool you could use to be more productive. This podcast's featured productivity tool is Lovable, a free AI-powered app builder that lets you create your own custom productivity tools without any coding. Instead of settling for someone else's app, you could build exactly what works for you. Create a personalized task manager, a custom calendar, a to-do list tailored to your workflow, or even a habit tracker designed around your specific goals. Just describe what you want and Lovable builds it for you in minutes. Personally, I love using Lovable to build tools that fit the way my brain works, rather than forcing myself to adapt to off-the-shelf software.
Today we're joined by Dr. Patrick Hickey, a retired clinical assistant professor in the USC College of Nursing, faculty principal for the Capstone Scholars Program, and a nurse with over 45 years of experience across emergency care, the operating room, patient safety, and public health. But beyond all of that, Dr. Hickey is an adventurer, having climbed the 7 summits, traveled to 88 countries, flown planes, ridden motorcycles, and lived a life focused on balance, wellness, and purpose. We're excited to talk to him about how he fills his cup, what motivates him, and how we can all climb our own inner peaks.
Welcome to the Productive Mind podcast.
Is there anything that you'd like to add to your introduction or share something with our audience?
No, it's good. It's always humbling to hear introductions, and I never really think you're talking about me when I hear those introductions, but no, I'm good. I appreciate it. I'm sure as we talk, we'll be able to fill in some of the gaps.
Cool. So this entire episode is about, overcoming our own challenges and balancing our personal wellness with being productive and a functional human being while doing challenging things. And so I'm curious, why do you think in general we struggle so much with prioritizing ourselves?
Well, I think it goes back to how we're brought up. Actually, the way we're brought up, we're taught to do as many things as we can to make ourselves stand out. We're taught to do things for other people. But when I look at students at the university level, I see them working hard every day to do as best they can, but they don't take time out to take care of themselves. So I always say to my students, be selfish in a good way. So selfish is kind of negative when you look it up, and if you look up selfish in the dictionary, the selfish is said lacking consideration for others, concerned chiefly with one's own personal profit or pleasure. So it's kind of a negative connotation. So when I say be selfish, I always add be selfish in a good way, because when I see students trying to be the best they can be, they struggle, work really hard, are super committed. But it seems to be that they wait until the end of 4 years of a very hard, challenging program and then go on a vacation or do something. I change it up and I say, do it every semester. Do it after every test. Don't wait. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Up, the animated movie Up.
Yeah, I just watched that actually
did you?
A little bit ago, yeah.
One of my favorites. Remember, and it's been years since I've seen it, but remember they had that little picture of the place they wanted to go, and not to ruin the story for the people listening, but they kept putting it off, then life got in the way, and they were never able to attain that dream of going to that place. Well, if you keep putting things off, the longer and longer you put them off, they may be unattainable. So what I say when I say be selfish in a good way, if you've had a hard test, treat yourself, and it doesn't have to be something big. It could be going to a shop and having your favorite yogurt, something along the lines, because we need to be doing a better job of rewarding ourselves. But again, going back to the question, I think it's just the way that we're brought up. we get presents at Christmas, and we do give, and we're taught to serve others and help other people. But it just seems in our society that it seems negative if you take care of yourself too much. I mean, physically we all, I hope, have workout regimens where we work on our bodies. So we do a fairly good job of doing that. You can go to the fitness centers and see people on the treadmills and doing everything. But mentally, socially, we're not treating ourselves enough. And that's a big challenge.
Outside of students, do you think this is something that we eventually learn in our adult life? Or do you think, once you develop this problem as a student, it kind of persists throughout your life?
It persists, and at the ripe old age of 70, I can say that as you get older and you get mature, you can see the bigger picture. At a younger age, you're not seeing that bigger picture, and you're not taking care of yourselves. And when you don't take care of yourselves, it leads to a lot of chronic problems. When you have an acute problem, if we take care of it, that's great. But if you don't take care of the acute problem, which is not taking care of yourselves, it turns into a chronic problem. When it becomes a chronic problem, then it persists for life. And then you can never get into that mindset or that mode of taking care of yourself, because now you've gone down this road so far of not taking care of yourselves and not being selfish in a good way, that you end up having a lot of medical problems. You end up having hypertension. Sedentary lifestyle leads to obesity. You're not eating food properly, and it just goes on, kind of like a domino effect in the wrong way.
I love your message with like being selfish and taking the time to take care of yourself, but I feel like people are scared to be selfish and like take time for themselves and go off course of like their main goals because it feels like a distraction or not what they're supposed to be doing. Like you said, people don't travel until they've graduated from undergrad. That's probably because like during that time, if they take like a week to travel, they feel like they're not like being involved in clubs or doing research, studying for the MCAT, stuff like that. So what would you say to somebody that's scared of being selfish and feels like it's a distraction?
I totally agree with you. And those are the students that I work with all the time. So I understand the mindset. And it's hard. It's really, really a challenge. So incrementally, if you establish goals and create small goals, measurable goals where you can treat yourself a little bit, not in a big way, but just incrementally little small steps towards taking care of yourself. And it is a challenge, with the mindset of students trying to compete for grad school. I've got to have the best grades. And I tell everybody, and you've heard me speak before, you don't have to obsess about getting an A. Do as well as you can academically is what I say. So I kind of try to take the pressure off by saying things like that. And if you hear that from more people and you're more comfortable with that process, then you can attain self-gratification in a good way. But yes, it is a challenge. Students aren't hearing it enough. We're not hearing it from our parents enough. It's our society. When my wife and I traveled around the world, we did a round the world trip for a year, and when we were in Japan, at 10 o'clock at night, we'd see all the lights on in the office buildings. And the people come down to these stalls where they have soup kitchens, and you just eat a bowl of soup really quick, then you run back up to the office. So the push on that generation and that society is to work, to exceed, to keep moving further up the food chain. And we have that here also. And before we know it, we're 45, we're 50, we're in debt, we're not in good health, we're stressed to the max, and we're looking back on life and regretful. The last thing you want to have on your deathbed is regrets. I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done that. No one's going to, on your deathbed, no one's going to look at you and say you should have spent more time at work. I've been in the same boat myself. I work. I've been there, done that, so I understand it. Even though I share, this is what you should do, my wife always captures me and says, well, Patrick, you're telling all these kids to slow down, take a break. You need to do it also. So I'm guilty of it also. So I understand the mindset.
Yeah, I think I've watched I think it was a white coat ceremony at some med school, and a priest was the one giving a speech, and he talked about how he's seen countless people on deathbeds, and the things that surrounding these people are not the fact that they had a B or messed up on an exam, but rather the people and the experiences that played a really important part in their life. That is what is at the front of their minds.
Well, the challenge, as you guys know, especially going into healthcare and medicine, is the expectation is that you're going to be there to take care of other people. But if you can't take care of yourself first, you're not going to be any good to those people. As you indicated earlier, I was a nursing faculty. I tell all my students, when you go into the patient's room, you got to put your game face on. Even though you're dealing with financial issues, relationship issues, all kinds of things, and you're in a bad mood, that patient doesn't want to be there. You got to be on your best behavior. You got to be there for them and be a cheerleader and a leader and everything else. And you got to put all your feelings aside. And it's a challenge, for us to have that game face on all the time. The suicidal ideation rate in our young students today, college level, your age level, is sky high. It's sky high because of the expectations to do as best you can. It's sky high because there's only so many slots in the graduate level programs that you want. So when you look to your left and your right, these are your friends, but you're competing with them. And that's how we're driven. Yes, as a consumer, I want the best doctor taking care of me, but I still want that best doctor that's taking care of me to be balanced. One thing that's lacking in our lives is balance. I say take care of ourselves by being selfish in a good way, but we need to have balance in our life. And I write about that. I wrote about that in my book, that we have to have balance. We have to strive for physical wellness, mental wellness, social wellness. And you've got to keep all those things going and then be academically well and then be socially active. So the challenge is keeping all those balls in the air and not letting any of them fall. Because if I'm the one faculty you come to write a letter for grad school, and I only see you when you're letting that ball fall on the ground, my perception is that maybe you don't have what's needed. I don't realize that you're doing all the other things. So going to that, I think we need to be more open for students, speaking to faculty. Faculty don't know all of the challenges that students are going through. They have no conception of it. You come to class, they expect you to be ready, they expect you to prepare your lectures, have read their PowerPoints. They have no idea all the things that you're dealing with. I didn't know that until I became faculty principal of the Capstone Scholars Program, where I was able to connect with students at a different level than most faculty do. That's when I learned and saw the bigger picture. When I started leading students on medical mission trips for 15 years to Latin America, that's when I got to connect with students, because we were together in a foreign country 24/7. That made a big difference. So I feel that I've been gifted in my life by being able to get to know students at a level where most faculty don't. And I wish more faculty understood that level of where students are. They have no idea the expectations we put on you. I had one of my students years and years ago, he said, Dr. Hickey, I almost committed suicide this week. I said, oh my God. I said, what happened? He said, well, actually it was because of you. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it was your test. And I said, my test isn't that hard. He said, no, it wasn't that. It was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Your test was the 5th one I had that week. I didn't know that student was given tests all that week. I had no idea that he had to prepare for all those. And I said something to him that changed my life and his and every other student that had me as faculty. I said, here's the deal. I went to class that next week and I said, any one of you and every one of you, you have one option once a semester with me to take one of my tests at another time that's more convenient for you. And I did that because my student had almost committed suicide, and I had no idea. So I share that because I think there needs to be better communication between faculty. There needs to be better workshops where we can sit down at a table with students and feel their pulse, so to speak, speaking medically. Where are you at right now? Where's your head at? How stressed are you? Because we have no idea.
In general, do you think the younger or more recent generations are working to shift the narrative a little bit to kind of take care of themselves more? Like, do you see people now paying attention to our mental health and filling our cup more than in the past?
I see a lot more resources available, yes, but I only think it's that way because the volume has grown, and we need to do something about it. There's more resources out there, but the issue and the challenge is, as you well know, we don't know if you have the problem. We don't know if I call it suffering in silence. I don't know if you're suffering in silence. You've got to let me know. So my style is, I typically would say, how are you doing today? And my students would say, I'm good. No. How you doing? No, I'm okay, Dr. Hickey. And I do this. I push for a third time, and I consistently do it. No, really, I've got a couple minutes. I kind of got a feeling there's something going on. What's up? And then they unload. But very few people do that. And yes, we have mental health counseling. Yes, we have resources. But there's still a stigma, not as much as what was before, but there still is a stigma that kids don't want to take advantage of that. And I didn't know the enormity of need there was out there until I started doing my medical mission trips. When I was alone, sole faculty on those trips, I had to ask all my students to tell me what medicine they were taking while we were in country, because if anything happened, I was the only adult there, and I was responsible for all my students. So I was kind of like mom and dad all combined. And when those students gave me the list of all the medicines they were taking, it was all confidentiality, of course. I saw so many anti-anxiety drugs. I saw so many antidepressants that at that point in time, I had no idea that students were taking. That was many, many years ago. Now it's out there where students are openly talking about it, and it's okay to talk about it. But going back to your question, there are more resources. I think people are taking care of themselves a little better. I think peers, your friends, are more perceptive of depression and other issues. And sometimes it's the peer, the friend that says, hey, Shyam, I think you need some help. Let me help you. Let me take you to so-and-so or whatever. So I think we're in a better place as far as resources, but I think the pressure has been ramped up. I see med school getting even more and more competitive, not just med school, engineering programs, all the grad school programs. So even though we have the resources, the problem gets worse and worse.
So before we talk about how to avoid this problem, one last question. So imagine there is a person in their early 20s and they're right in front of you. What would you tell them to convince them to focus on themselves in terms of like long-term benefits? Like the students and young adults at this time typically don't see the bigger picture, right? So what would you tell them in the moment? This is why you should focus on XYZ because 30 years from now.
Right. Well, and that's a good point. And what I do is I go back to fitness. I start with something that's very easy for all of us, just adopting a simple fitness program. And it doesn't have to be going to the gym. It could be walking. You know, when I was stressed out, one of the reasons I left university was I was stressed. I loved what I did, but I was internalizing everything. So I would get up at noon and I'd walk around campus for an hour just to kind of clear my head. So for that student, I'd say let's develop some goals. Number one goal, fitness. Let's just start taking care of yourself initially. Let's make some time for yourself. In fact, earlier today, I was reaching out to a national leader who's a student, and I reached out to him a month ago a couple of times. He never answered me back. So when I texted him this morning, I said, take a few seconds for yourself and just reach back out to me because I want to help you. And he did. He took a few seconds from his busy schedule. He's like full-time work, full-time school, but he sent me a text. He said, I'm so sorry, But it was that I mentioned it, take some time for yourself. So it's really sad that I had to say, take some time for yourself just to answer me when I've been reaching out to you. But to that student, I would say, let's just start a program. I would even go walk with the student to show them, here's something you can start with. When I was on Mount Everest, I did a blog, and I helped people to reconnect with fitness and nature. And I would encourage people, if you've never seen a sunset, go out after supper and walk for an hour and see how beautiful this world is. Or, heaven forbid, get up early in the morning and see a sunrise, because it's just as magical. But some of the simple things in life, so it doesn't have to be complicated for that student. Simple, keep it simple, stupid, the KISS principle. Let's just work on fitness, number one. Let's get you walking, and when you walk, you take your mind off the studies, the anxiety, all the other stuff. You refocus, you hear the birds, you see the clouds, you see the traffic, you're listening to your music, you're tuning everything out. So, keeping it simple, just go walk.
And why should they invest in their future? What is the benefit 30 years from now or just in the future?
Well, if we just talked about just that one aspect of what I was talking about, just developing a fitness regimen, that's huge. I'm 70 and I maintain a daily level of fitness to make sure I have quality of life. In America, we think we all want to live as long as we can. And we think we have the best healthcare system in the world. I've come to learn after having been in healthcare for 45 years that it's quality of life, not quantity of life, that's most important. If you want to have a better quality of life when you're older, when you get to my age, you need to develop a regimen early. So that same student you're talking about that's now 20 years old, and we're talking 30, 40 years down the line, if they don't set up that basic fitness regimen, mental health, physical health, social health, if they don't set that up early in life, they're going to be in a bad place later in life. They don't know it, but I have the years of experience to say, here's where you should be. And not everyone's going to listen. I mean, that's a challenge as a teacher. I didn't know that when I started teaching. I thought everyone's going to listen, everyone's going to benefit, but they don't, and everyone hears the message in a different way. So if they don't listen to you, maybe they can look and see some people that are in a bad way physically, for example, that can't do the things they need to do. When my mom and dad were older, they couldn't reach up to get things out of the kitchen counter cabinets that were above the counter because they had so much arthritis because they didn't take care of themselves earlier in life.
You said that like when you were younger too, you were like, you were a lot busier also. You also had that time of stress and like not taking care of yourself. You mentioned like you liked going on walks. Like what other activities did you do when you were younger to kind of set yourself up and find that balance?
I was a runner. I tested and tried everything I could. I had asthma when I was a young kid. My doctor told me never to run again in my life, which was a death sentence for me because I loved running. But unknown to parents and family, I started doing a lot of running. I've been an adventurer all my life. I went against the grain. You know, I've often maintained find your own unique pathway in life. So at an early age, I grew up on a farm, very poor, had hand-me-downs, felt kind of uncomfortable, awkward about, you know, having that lifestyle. But I found my own unique pathway, which was to an extreme. And I bring that unique pathway to my students. I try to help them to find their own unique pathways in life. One thing I've seen on campus and being around students, a lot of students just follow others, and there doesn't seem to be enough leaders out there. So when I first started teaching at the University of South Carolina, I saw the kids with the pink and purple hair and all the piercings and lots of tattoos, and I thought, kind of odd, they kind of stand out. But then I came to really like them because they reminded me of myself when I was that age. I was different in a good way. And I always encourage people, be different in a good way and find your own unique pathway in life. And when you find that pathway in life, you'll have a lot of naysayers. You'll have a lot of people saying, no, you can't do that. My own dad, when I started traveling around the world, said, you can't quit a good job. You've got to have a wife and 2.3 kids and a picket fence and all those things that society expects that we should all aspire to do. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do the status quo. I mean, the nice thing about our world and the generation that we're in is we can do a lot of things if we have the passion to do it. Passion trumps everything. So if you have the passion to do something, whether it's sports or academics, flying a plane, jumping out of a plane, you know, I say follow your passion. That makes a big difference in life because so many people go through life focused on their career and they don't step outside that pathway. But when you step outside that pathway of your career, oh my God, it's an amazing world out there. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, I've traveled 88 countries around the world. I mean, it's just, I encourage students in their gap year, you know, don't necessarily have to work. If you're medical in a medical office, put a backpack on, go travel the world. Because if you are pre-med and you're going into med school, you've got another 6 to 8 years of internship, fellowship, and all that stuff. And before the dust clears, you're now late 20s, early 30s, and you're just starting your profession, and you don't get 4 weeks or 6 weeks vacation here in the United States.
But what would you say to like your responsibilities versus like taking care of your responsibility stuff that you still have to do while finding your meaning and your path?
Yeah, it's important you follow your responsibilities. That's part of the goal setting. You know, do what you need to be doing, but find the time to take care of yourself. And that comes down to time management. I think we all struggle with time management. You know, a lot of my students feel that they're great at handling many tasks and they can do a lot of things at once. I see the efforts of their work and it doesn't make sense because I see their papers they hand in, the tests they do, and I can see that they're not putting the same effort they should into those things. But time management is a challenge when you're trying to take care of what you should be doing and then jumping outside of the tasks to do the personal things. But if there's a will, there's a way, as they say. And I mean, I found a way to do it. Everybody else should. I think the challenge is, to your question, people are so focused on the path they're on that they feel guilty to veer left or right. They feel, as you mentioned earlier, they feel like if I'm not working, I'm studying for the MCAT. If I'm not doing this, I'm not doing enough. I mean, I often tell pre-med kids it's the busiest pathway at the University of South Carolina because there are expectations. When it is so competitive to get into med school, you have to be doing all the things you're doing. You've got to be involved in student orgs. You've got to be a leader. You've got to do service. You've got to do international mission trips, or even research, or getting funding for research. So in the midst of doing all that, how do you find time to take care of yourself? But you've got to find that time. You've got to map it all out. And then sit down with someone that can help you see the forest for the trees. Because if you don't ask for help, you're just going to keep going down that road until someone grabs you by the collar, so to speak, and say, hey, slow down. Hey, have you considered this? And I don't think we have enough people doing that. I think the resources are here if students would go in voluntarily and seek help, but a lot of times they don't. So that's where I like to come into students' lives and say, boy, I see you're multitasking and you're doing a fantastic job, but how's your head? Where are you at with that? What are you doing to take care of yourself? So it might take an interaction with somebody else to help you. And it could be family, could be a friend, could be faculty. Go ahead.
Okay, so using the pre-med path as an example, if somebody's feeling like overworked and drained from this path, like they need to be pulled out of it to take care of themselves, would you almost say that might be the wrong path for them?
Not necessarily. It might be just that they're focused too much on the path and not enough on themselves. I mean, as I said earlier, it is a busy path. You've got to be super busy, but at the same time, you've got to find balance. Mm-hmm. I speak about that in my book. In my Seven Summits book, I talk about the things that I feel are most important. Balance in life. Again, I've talked about it earlier. Finding mental balance, social balance, wellness, goals, attitude, potential, success, and legacy. Those are all my chapters. Sometimes as I said earlier, you can't see the forest for the trees. In other words, you don't see that you're in this spiral, so to speak, that you're working too hard and you're not taking enough time. So it's not that they're on the wrong path. It's just that they need to kind of recalibrate. And that recalibration could be by meeting with someone that has their best interests at heart. That calibration could be a mom or dad saying, you need to come home more often. So it usually takes somebody else that sees that person in that pathway to say, we need to do something. Because left on their own, they're probably not going to change. Left on their own, it can turn destructive. So that's why we need to be watching out for each other, watching out for your friends, so to speak.
Yeah.
So now I think this is a perfect transition to talk about your personal hobbies and the things that you've done to fill your cup. So what is, putting aside professional and career goals, what does a fulfilling life mean to you?
In my case, finding a significant other was huge. I grew up on a farm, a lot of poverty, and felt like I was an ugly duckling, never felt like I would ever be excited or attracted to anybody else in life. I was very fortunate when I found my significant other. And then very fortunate also that I found someone that wanted to share what we both wanted, which was a life of adventure. So my wife Carol and I have wanderlust. So wanderlust is a desire for travel and adventure. So we've made that part of our lives. So we've been together 40 plus years. And we've traveled 88 countries around the world, and we've been 24/7 for 3 complete years at a time. So because most relationships, the husband and wife or significant other go to work, you're busy during the day, you see each other at supper. We spent 24/7 for a whole year, 3 different years at a time together. So because of that, we became best friends. And it's such a joy in life to share what you're doing with your best friend. So for me, the joy of life has been finding a significant other that shares your interests and actually pulls you out to do things. For my wife is always pulling me out to go camping or hiking or climbing or She doesn't like flying, so she won't go flying with me. But finding something that excites you to get your mind off of your work, and it's unique for everybody. Mine are just a little bit more extreme, mountain climbing. Back in '96, there was a famous expedition on Mount Everest, made famous by the book Into Thin Air and the movie Into Thin Air. I read about it in a magazine. When I read about this expedition where I think it was 9 people died one night, it was an awful tragedy. I read about the one doctor on the trip, Dr. Beck Weathers, who was a pathologist in Houston, Texas, how he would never be able to complete the 7 summits because he had lost his hands and lost his nose on this expedition. I didn't know what the 7 summits were at that time. Very few of us did, because only 70, at that time, when I read that article, I think there was only a couple dozen people in the world had done it. So for some unknown reason, with the support of my wife, I said, I'm going to do it. So I did a lot of research and went around the world as an independent mountain climber, and successfully, on my first attempt, climbed the highest mountain on each continent of the world. And when I summited Mount Everest, I became the first nurse in the world to have done what I had done, and joined only 75 people in the world that had done that. So I took advantage of that opportunity, wrote the book about it. All the money from the book and my motivational talks, when I used to be a motivational speaker, have gone to my scholarships. But most importantly, I've taken those experiences and put them into a program at the University of South Carolina called Personal Challenge. So I looked at my students, and I looked at them as a parent would look at their kids and say, I know you've got potential, but you don't realize it. So I would push my students to get outside their comfort zone, to take on a task that was uncomfortable to them. For example, climbing the climbing wall to Strom. And for people that aren't listening, it's like a 60, 75-foot wall that you can climb up and rappel down. If you're afraid of heights, that would be an admirable challenge, or going skydiving. So I set off and developed this program. That program started, 15, 20 years ago, and it's still going. So students are still going through their own personal challenge in the Capstone Scholars Program. They're writing about it, and then they're moving on because they accomplished one challenge, and that takes them on to the next challenge. So life is all about challenges. You get to set the bar, how high you want it to be. My bar was quite high for most of my challenges, but I pushed myself to do it that way. I always felt I had something to prove to myself. When I became a nurse, my mom accepted my future profession. She thought there's nothing more godly than being a nurse, but my dad disowned me. So for most of my life, I've tried to prove to my dad that I could meet his expectations. And I think all of us in our own way are trying to meet someone's expectations, whether it be our own, our parents, or our faculty, or others. And by trying to meet others' expectations and then setting your own, therein lay a lot of challenges too. I don't know if that goes, in a roundabout way, goes back to your initial question.
Yeah, so your hobbies all follow a general theme. So you mentioned you skydive, fly planes, ride motorcycles, climb 7 summits. Was there any specific, event or trigger that led you to pursuing these passions?
Actually, that's an interesting question, because when I reflect back on it, I think there was. Early in my nursing career, while I was in nursing school, I had a part-time job on an ambulance. So I was going to the scene of accidents where people were in car accidents or shootings or stabbings. Then when I graduated and became a nurse, after a year or two of medical surgical nursing, I started working in a level 1 trauma center where every day we had shootings and stabbings and people dying. And I came to find out that my desire for some of these adventures were driven from what I was seeing in my workaday world, where these people that were dying didn't have a chance to keep going in life and experiencing all the things that they wanted to experience. And when I was seeing so much of that happening, I thought to myself, I want to do as much as I can in the short time that I've got. So I think a lot of my passions became very extreme. And when I did a poll unofficially with my ambulance driving friends when I worked on an ambulance, and with my trauma nurse and doctor friends when I worked in trauma, I found that a good number of professionals in those areas also did cutting edge kind of things because they saw that life has finality and they saw it on a daily basis. And they, like me, felt they wanted to do as much as they could before it was their time to go, which is kind of a weird way to look at it. But it is amazing, when I did look at, work on the ambulance, work in ER trauma, that a lot of us that did the same things were the ones that would go skydiving and flying and climbing and all that kind of stuff.
I would imagine, people in any career would have a moment where they realize something, maybe not to the extreme of working in healthcare and trauma, but, they have this thought that they should go in and do something else. But I would argue like 99% of people wouldn't necessarily act on it, right?
Right.
In your instance, I'm sure there's, people within healthcare that have thought the same thing, but they don't act on it.
It is a challenge, and you see that in healthcare providers. For example, nurses, my own profession. Sometimes you'll see a nurse that you seem is very distant or very leathered, and they don't seem to be emotional or responding in the appropriate way you should think when they're taking care of your family member. What happens in healthcare is we build walls. And when we see so much death, dying, pain, and suffering on a daily basis or weekly basis, if we were to allow ourselves to react in the appropriate way each and every time we saw that, we'd be a basket case. So we have to distance ourselves a lot of times from other people. So for the general public, when they look at us, they think, God, I can't believe they're not emotional. I can't believe they don't care for my dad. They're non-caring. They're just going about, they're joking. Well, that's a defense mechanism that we're using to get by. And then going back to your question about changing positions, a lot of people don't change. And when they don't change out of a certain job or a position or a role, they just continue to be bitter. If you don't like something, do something different. But people don't hear that message. People don't realize that you are valuable. When I quit my job for the first time, my dad said, "You'll never get another job in your life." And I was scared until I applied a year later and I got a job because I'm a nurse. And I didn't realize I was gold. I could go away for a year. My wife was a CPA. She thought the same. She thought, God, I'm giving up my job. Am I ever going to get a job again? There was no questions asked about that 1 year gap on our resume. But people don't know that. They don't want to test the waters. They get so secure in a job, even though I hate to say this, but they hate their job, they hate their boss, they hate going to work. Hate's an awful word that I don't like using. But if you're in that mode, step out of it, and the grass is always greener on the other side, so to speak. But sometimes we don't have the courage to do that, or you don't want to lose the money or the advancement or the senior status that you've got in life. So you just keep going down that road, and you keep getting more bitter and bitter and bitter. And when you're doing that, if you're the mother or father in a family, your kids see that because they see the way you're acting when you come home. And it's just a domino effect. And again, it goes back to no one's saying to us, if you don't like what you're doing, change. Everyone's saying, keep doing what you're doing, persist, persevere. And you think, well, I just need to keep going. But sometimes keep going isn't the right thing.
Going back to your hobbies, do they build on each other, or did you all pursue all of them at once?
Incrementally, they came with the wind. My wife and I were on a beach in Bonsai Beach. We're in a beach in Brazil, and we saw on this mountaintop guys were hang gliding, and we looked up at it and it looked really cool, and they were just up there for hours at a time. And some guy saw us, came over, started talking. This looks pretty cool, doesn't it? I go, yeah. I said, but I'm afraid of heights. Ain't going to work for me. But he slowly convinced us to jump in his hippie van and go to the top of this mountain, and encouraged us to do a couple of test runs. And an hour later, I was hang gliding thousands of feet in the air. So it wasn't planned. It's kind of a whim. When things happen, it's just you're there at the moment. Same with scuba diving, same with sailing, same with skydiving. I mean, a lot of the things I've done weren't planned out necessarily, but at the time, not to take advantage of it would have been foolish. When my wife and I backpacked around the world for a year, we were in Europe. We're at the bottom of the Eiffel Tower, and I think at that time it was $20 to go up to the top of the tower. $20 for us backpacking at that time was a whole day's meals, our bed for the night, everything. We thought, that's a lot of money. But we thought, God, if we don't do it now, we may never do it again. So we did it. So I send that message to my students: do as much as you can in the short time that you've got here. Step outside your comfort level. Do things you would never think of doing. And that's the excitement in life. I mean, I never thought I'd go hang gliding. I don't think I'll ever do it again. I've gone bungee jumping. I know I'll never do it again. I always say, going back to the door opener thing, I loved opening doors of opportunity. If you step through and you like what you see on the other side, do it. If you step through and you don't like it, don't do it anymore, but at least step through. So I like stepping through. I stepped through many doors in my life. Some I liked, some I didn't, but at least I went through the door. So what I mean by that is I went and bungee jumped. I hesitated. I asked the guy to push me. He said, we can't. I wanted to back down, but I didn't. I jumped. So that's a door I went through. I went through that door. I did it. I'll never do it again. Other things I went through the door, I liked it. I kept doing it. The mountain climbing, the flying, even though I'm afraid of heights. So, the personal challenge program at Capstone was developed because of my fear. When I climbed the highest mountains in the world, I climbed it with a deathly fear of heights that made me cry in every mountain around the world, a nauseating fear of heights. It's never gone away, but I still fly. I love takeoffs. I love landings. I just don't like the in-between.
This might be a big question, but through all of your dangerous endeavors and activities, have you ever had a near-death experience? And then did you learn something about life on the way out of that?
Yeah, the most prominent one, there's been many in my mountain climbing. Anyone you talk to that's a high altitude mountain climber like myself will have lots of those stories. On Everest, before I summited, I was going from Camp 3 to Camp 4, and I ran out of oxygen. I'd taken my down suit off because I was climbing straight up, and it was warm, but it was brutally cold. Couldn't get my down suit on. My oxygen had ran out. And I remember thinking at the time, if I could just sit down and rest, I'd have enough energy to get to camp. I was all by myself, didn't have a Sherpa. But in my mind, with what oxygen I had left, I thought if I sat down, I would never get up again. Long story short, it reduced me to crawling into high camp. I couldn't even speak. It was just guttural. I was so hypothermic. And the last thing I heard before I passed out was a Sherpa saying he's never going to make it. I woke up a couple of hours later. My buddies were going through motions, getting their clothes on. I just followed them out and up the hill. But it was a near-death experience. Before I got to camp, I felt like I was a leaf. I saw my mom, I saw my dad, I saw my wife. It's those kind of things you've heard people talk about when they're just about to die. I didn't see a bright light or anything like that, but I felt like I was going out the door. There's been some other leaps of faith associated with my high-altitude climbing that I've taken before, that just blind faith. I would do certain things and not live to regret it. Others have lived to regret it. One of the stories I share about my mountain climbing is taking my best friend Sean to the top of the world. Sean was a fellow climber from my hometown in Canada. He had died 2 years earlier on Everest. I went home to Canada knowing that a lot of people die. I'm a realist. I did my research. Didn't want to die, but know a lot of people do. So went home to Canada to tell my family goodbye. Went to Sean's daughter and said, your dad started the journey up the hill. I'm going to finish it. So for 2.5 months, I had Sean with me in an urn in my backpack until I got to the top of the world. Got to the top of the world, thank God, number one. Number two, it was time to call my wife on a satellite phone. I made it, 7 years of training. Then number three, it was time to get Sean out of the urn. Took a little while because the urn was taped and it was 40 below zero, and I cursed him a few times, but I finally got that urn open and swear to God, it was like Aladdin's lamp, sucked the ashes out of the urn and made peace with him and the world for doing that. But the top of Everest is littered with bodies of people that didn't listen to their significant others. My wife probably saved my life because she said, promise me, promise me, promise me. If something bad happens, you'll turn around. So I've always listened to my wife, and I knew I'm obstinate. I'm kind of like med school students. I've got tunnel vision. I got to go, 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 go. I'm like an ever-ready rabbit. But I'm a realist also. I want to come home to my wife. So I listened to her and her urging of, turn around if there's an emergency, really saved my life, and many times over.
So in these near-death moments, you've ever regretted pursuing, like whatever dangerous activity you were doing? Are you telling yourself, I'll never do this again, I wish I didn't? Or are you like happy that?
I'm glad. No,
glad in a
no.
way.
I'm not regretful that I did it. I just know that I did it and I don't like it and I'll never do it again. I'm almost glad that I did it because I pushed myself out of my comfort zone. I think very few of us push ourselves out of our comfort zone to the degree that I do. But I think everybody in their own way needs to push themselves out of their comfort zone, not to the extreme that I do, but to the point where you get to a level of maybe uncomfortableness that's unique to yourself, and then back down if you have to. But no, I have no regrets. I mean, when I bungee jumped, it scared the death out of me. Skydiving scared the death out of me. But I never regret. I've never regretted anything I've done. So because of my Mount Everest and my high altitude climbing, I've lost my smell and my taste. My ENT said too much high altitude climbing, too close together, too extreme temperatures. I froze and numbed everything. So years later, I can't taste anything or smell anything. But I don't regret doing what I did. I wish before I die that I could taste a hamburger again. Every weekend when we cook, I get my nose close to the frying pan when we're frying onions and peppers, and I just wish I could smell, but I don't regret that I lost my smell and my taste because I did what I did. So, and again, going back to your deathbed, I don't want to be on my deathbed. I don't think I'll be regretting anything in life other than I wish I had more time with my wife.
Where are all the places you've skydived or bungee jumped, like around the world?
Well, Chester, South Carolina, I used to be the advisor for the Flying Gamecocks, the skydiving team, even though I'm afraid of heights. Wow. So it used to be part of the Capstone Scholars Program that we would all go skydiving there. Bungee jumping in New Zealand, bungee jumping here, whitewater rafting in New Zealand, Australia, sailing off the coast of Australia, scuba diving on the Barrier Reef. Actually, when I was scuba diving on the Barrier Reef, I was with a group of Americans. While my wife was learning how to scuba dive, we were off trying to attract sharks. So it was, again, getting out of our comfort zone and doing something that you normally wouldn't do. It wasn't shark cages at the time, but we were attracting sharks, which looking back, I can say a lot of things I've done are kind of foolish, I guess, but I live to tell the tale. And I guess the tale that I tell is do as much as you can in the short time you got, but have guardrails in place, because you don't want to step over the edge too much, because you see that in the news all the time. If you don't have the barriers in place, you'll go too far, and when you go too far, you could kill yourself. I've been very close, came back a few times, but again, no regrets.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your hobby of flying. How did you get into flying? Because you mentioned you're afraid of heights. And why did you keep doing it?
I grew up on a farm in Canada, and I would lay in the hay fields, and we were about 45 miles away from Canada's capital, Ottawa, and all the planes that were flying out of Ottawa would fly over my farm, and they weren't that high at that time in life, so I would just lay there in the field, and I'd look at the bodies, the bottom belly of the plane, and I would imagine all these people going to other countries, and the smells they would be smelling, the taste they would be tasting, the colorful clothes and the robes and everything that they would be seeing. And my mind would just go to these places that I had never been before. So when I was in school, a geography teacher got me even more excited about adventure and travel. So for some reason, that same geography teacher got me excited about flying. And I shared with him my joy of seeing planes fly overhead. He said, well, Patrick, why don't you just go to a local airport and take a flight lesson? I can remember my very first flight lesson. I was so confused. I got up in the cockpit of a two-seater plane. I didn't know where I was, and it was wintertime, and I started flying. And even though I was afraid of heights, it was such an exhilaration to take off in the plane and then to land the plane. My two favorites have always been takeoff and landing, but everything in between is a blur. So I kept doing it. When I moved from Canada to Texas, I kept pursuing my license. And then I always had a comfort level when I would have somebody with me, because if I had somebody with me, it was a distraction. I could talk to them. When I talked to somebody who was with me, it took my mind off of what was going on around me. So then years later, most recently, I got my instrument rating, which means I'm able to fly in inclement weather. And I actually enjoy having my instrument rating because it teaches you how to fly in the clouds. When you're flying in clouds, you can't see the ground, so there's no fear of heights. So it's kind of cool, actually. But I did the flying piece, and I was driven despite my fear of heights because I wanted to become an angel pilot. And an angel pilot is a pilot that flies a patient from their home to the hospital or hospital to the home at no expense to the patient. And the pilot pays for their own fuel, it's their plane, their time. Costs a lot of money to do that, but I was driven to do that. So it took me 2 years and a lot of money to become an instrument-rated pilot solely to do angel flights. So I drove myself out of my comfort level to become an instrument-rated pilot so I could help patients, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you actually stole my next question. So angel flights it's interesting because you've taken your career in healthcare and in a way kind of merged it with a hobby that you're passionate about.
Well, I've often maintained bring your passion to your profession. A lot of times we have our profession, then way over here on the outside is our passion. I say bring your passion to your profession. So if you're musically inclined in your healthcare, if there's a piano, if there's some kind of instrument, play some music for the patients. In my case, I have the talent of being an accomplished pilot, so I bring my skills to my profession and I can help. So there's always a way to bring your passion to your profession, and you can have extremes, but I always maintain that you can bring whatever that is into your profession. If you love reading, you have a passion for reading or poetry or whatever, literature, you can bring that in. You have a patient laying in a bed, you sit there and read to them. There's a lot of things you can do when you look at your passions that can be incorporated into what your future profession is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like you mentioned there are people out there that hate their job, hate waking up every morning and doing something that, in a way empties their cup. But the idea of merging it with a passion and I guess finding a way to fill your cup.
Well, sometimes it seems there's two extremes. There's the work world that you're in for 8, 10, 12 hours or 16 hours. Sometimes it's hard to have a passion or an experience outside the work world because we're so driven to work. I tell my nursing students all the time, just before they graduate, enjoy your last Thanksgiving with your family, your last Christmas with your family, because as soon as you get employed, someone else is taking care of your schedule. Someone else is dictating what you're going to be doing. In fact, in healthcare, I see a lot of momentum now because of the generation of students of which you're that age group of the entitlement students, so to speak. I see a lot of them drifting towards professions in healthcare that fit their lifestyle. For example, knowing the life of a surgeon or whatever, you decide where you want to go. But when I taught my course in the Honors College on surgery, we'd go up to the operating room every night. The same surgeons were there every night. All those surgeons had significant others. They had kids at home, but they couldn't be there because they had to do surgery. So now I see a lot of kids want a 9-to-5 job. They don't want to do the grunt work that my generation did to get to where we're at. So they go towards professions like dermatology. Nothing wrong with dermatology, but it's a sweet schedule. 9 to 5, weekends off, evenings off, no call, or dental. Again, my dentist shuts down his office on Friday at noon. No evening call, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I appreciate that quality of life that you want, but I think you need a little bit of my work ethic, and I need a little bit of your quality of life to find that balance, because I think when you want that quality of life, the derm or whatever, you're not putting the work ethic in it to get to where you need to be. I need more of the quality of life that you want to pursue. I'm still in that 150% go, work ethic. I need to slow down, smell the proverbial roses, so to speak, where you guys are already there at that smell the roses piece, but you need a little bit more work ethic to get to where you need to be, if that makes sense.
Okay, wait, I wanted to ask, how many patients have you transported by plane?
Oh, God. I've done them by myself, and I've done them with other pilots. And it's usually I pick and choose my patients because of weight. So when you're a pilot, weight and balance is an issue. And I hate to say this, but with our American population growing older, we're growing heavier also. And when I take an assignment, I look at the weight of the patient. I don't look at the disease or the diagnosis. I look at the weight because that's what's important to me. I got to get them in the air and fly them. But typically, you'll see the patient is a certain weight, and the family member is a certain weight, and then maybe another family member's a weight, and that's overloading what I can take in my plane. At this point, I'm dozens and dozens of patients, but I don't have a plane right now that allows me to do that. So I'm looking into getting into a plane that's going to allow me to go back to be able to do it. I haven't been able to do it in a little while, but I'm challenged by weight restrictions with the planes that I've had.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense because it's like a small plane. So,
yeah. Weight balance is critical. I've got a friend that wants to fly with me. He's got to lose 10 pounds. Or I can't get the plane in the air. Weight balance is really critical. Yeah, if you're my size, you can get in my plane. If you're bigger than me, then it's not going to work.
So a lot of what you talked about, these hobbies, traveling, I guess even your career in a way, there's, I guess, noise at the side where people are telling you to do something different, to not do it at all. And I guess like young adults, I feel like experience that more than ever, whether it's parents, peers, your school. How do you, I guess, prioritize yourself, or I guess like block out the noise?
It's hard, but what I always say is get rid of the naysayers. Life's too short. Surround yourself with positive people that are going to build you up and support you with where you want to go. And you do that. You have the opportunity to do that. If you got people around you saying you can never do it, don't associate with them. You don't need negativity. That negativity is awful. It just spirals. So you have the opportunity to say you don't want to be with that person, or if it's on social media, you don't follow them anymore. There are ways to get rid of the noise that's out there. And the more that you surround yourself with like-minded people, like for example, for pre-med kids, I say get into a group like AED, FIDE, where you have like-minded people, where you're all going towards the same goals and you're supporting yourselves. You go study together, you work together. When you're around like-minded people, but I do see students are at odds with others, and what I try to say to them is say, here's the deal. I know you guys are challenged, and they're bickering amongst each other. I always point out to them, there's a children's hospital just down the road where kids are not going to see their next birthday. So let's put life in perspective. Let's focus on where you want to go. And, again, going back to support systems, the support system can be your peers, or it could be faculty, or it could be family. But I do see a lot of kids here that don't have family that support them and are going down a path that the family doesn't want them to go down. Case in point with myself. My dad didn't want me to become a nurse. I went against the grain. It wasn't good. It was a challenge. So I understand where my students are coming from. I see a lot of students here that parents want them to be a lawyer, but they want to be a doctor. So they're not getting support from family, but they're getting support from faculty or friends. That goes back to finding your own unique path. So it is challenging to do all those things that I'm saying at the ripe age of 18, 19, or 20. But I think it is hard to do it on your own. I believe students need a resource. They need people that they feel comfortable with. And I tell every parent that I meet, when I used to do a lot of promotion for USC, the first thing that your student should do, your son, your daughter, is connect with a faculty member. Connect with someone that's going to get to know them, know their likes, know their aspirations, have coffee with them every month. And the nice thing about USC is we have a program, take a faculty to lunch or to coffee or whatever. And those faculty are out there. And it could be a minister, it could be someone from the church, but someone, an adult, that can be your father, your long-distance father. I often consider myself as a Carolina dad for most of the students because they have a dad somewhere. I'm not a parent, I don't have kids. They have a dad, but I assume the dad role when I'm here, and I take that responsibility. A lot of young ladies that I don't even know that well, I put my dad hat on, I get my finger out and say, watch out for the boys. Maybe I'm taking myself a little bit to an extreme, but I feel personally responsible for helping them. And I make the case all the time that I want to help you to be as best you can be, because in healthcare, again, I make the case that at some point in time, you're going to be caring for me, my wife, my family, or friends. So that's the way I work through helping a lot of students. But I think students need to reach out. I don't think they reach out enough for help. Maybe faculty don't give off vibes, or they don't know they can reach out to other people. But everyone needs a support system to help them to get through it. And that support system could be a good friend. And hopefully they reach out. And if they don't reach out, hopefully that good friend picks up on something that they're doing that could be a destructive behavior. And it's so easy to get into that mode of destructive behaviors. One of my students called me one time crying, "Dr. Hickey, are you in the office?" I said, "Yes, come on." She came in my office crying, and I felt so bad for her. I gave her a big hug. She was one of my nursing students. And I said, "What's wrong?" I thought maybe her mom or dad died. It was her first B+. Poor thing. I mean, she's a nurse practitioner now. She's done well, and I teased her about it later, but she was so emotional about failing. It was her first B+, the only B+ she got in her 4 years at the university. But that's the level of stress that our students are under, and we don't understand that, and we need to have a better job. There was a student organization years ago where it wasn't a student organization, I apologize. It was a task force where we had faculty and students sit together at tables and just ask a whole lot of things, just like faculty come down from their perch of being a lecturer and sit at a table with students and just talk real daily talk. And it was so helpful. Oh my God. I mean, I thought I was pretty comfortable because I deal with a lot of students all the time. But boy, I was caught off guard by a whole lot of different things. And it helped me. And I think we need to have more roundtable discussions. It was a meals were prepared, box lunch, and it was a scenario where students would never, ever be in that situation. But I think if we had more of that, like living learning communities like this here, and have faculty, kind of like what I had in the Capstone Scholars Program. I mean, I would go into the dorms all the time. Afternoons, evenings, I'd walk through the dorms and just go sit on the students' beds. And I mean, that's where you need to meet and greet the students where they're at. If you kind of expect students are going to come to your office all the time, you're sadly mistaken, because they don't feel comfortable doing that. You've got to go to where they're at. And when you go to where they're at, then they have a better comfort level with you. Then they can share those concerns, those issues with you. Whereas before, if you're just a lecturer up there and they don't get the right vibes, even though you say, "Come to my office, I'll be available," I think more of us need to go to where you're at, and that makes a big, big difference.
Why do you think it takes like a round table dinner to get faculty to open up to to their students? Because like from a student perspective, like I feel like it's kind of inconsistent when I'm trying to like connect with faculty. Like some are very open like you, but then others like are kind of closed off. So why do you think it takes like a special event like that for faculty to want to open up and connect? I think it's
because I'm different, obviously, as you can tell from faculty. Different in a good way, I hope. I feel that as a teacher, you got to put yourself out there. So when I do my lectures, I put myself out there. One of my first classes of every semester, I always ask, how many of you aren't so good at math? And a couple of hands creep up, and mine goes up right away. And my students look at me and say, "Dr. Hickey, you're not good at math." I said, "Hell no." I said, "But here's the deal. I never told anybody about it. And for all my life as a nurse, I stressed out that I was going to make a medication error because I was confused about decimal points and multiplication. I just didn't have good math training, but I never admitted it. So I put myself out there all the time. I share with my students that I'm a math dummy. And I think when you share yourself with your students, students can connect with you better. They can see in you something about them. But I don't think a lot of us do that. I think a lot of us have this front and we're bittered. And when you look at certain faculty that do certain things the way they are, they've been burned by students. I've been burned by students before only because they take advantage of my naivety. They take advantage of me being nice and trying to help them. And some people, when that happens, they put up a wall, then I'm never going to be burned by them. I'm never going to let anybody take advantage of me again. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think it always comes from leadership. I think if the leadership of the university said, we need to develop more forums where we can have more of a comfort level where faculty can sit with students. I mean, taking a faculty lunch is a great opportunity, but a lot of kids have never heard of it. A lot of kids have never done it. I think if we had that kind of an opportunity, we'd create a lot more opportunities where students would feel more comfortable. Like, for example, when I go on my Latin American trips, I'll go for 10 days to Nicaragua, Belize, Costa Rica. I'm with the students 24/7. I mean, we just sit around a fire at night, or we sit outside the hostel, or I go into the rooms I mean, they don't get that opportunity here at the university. So when we come back, we're friends. I mean, there's very few faculty that can say you're friends with your students. I'm friends with my students. I mean, still, yes, I have to be the leader and the adult in the room, and I have to give them bad grades if they don't step up. I mean, all that kind of stuff, I have to be able to do that. But I like that role of being able to be friends with my students, and it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference with them asking for help.
Yeah, I feel like it also takes the right student, though, to like you said, not burn the professor, so then like they end up putting up that wall. Like you want to be a student too that's like interested and actually passionate and like wanting to invest in that relationship too.
It takes two.
You're right.
It's a two-way street, and I always tell my students that I think you should respect me for who I am and what I've done and all the letters behind my name and how I've prepared for the lecture. So I think you should respect me for that. But I feel respect is a two-way street. Mm-hmm. So I need to respect you. You need to respect me. I respect you by the way I address you. And I'm old school. I call my students young ladies, young gentlemen, kind of thing. And I always address my students that way. I would never call a student out in a class. I would never admonish someone in front of everybody to embarrass them. I would never do that kind of stuff. And I think it's the way you carry yourself as an individual, as faculty, that makes a difference in your interactions with students and other people. And that needs to be in the, I guess, kind of unwritten faculty guidebook. I think a lot of faculty come to work and it's a job, and it's a 9-to-5 job, but they don't realize they're dealing with personalities and egos and a whole lot of other things, and they let their own egos get out there in front of them, and that creates communication issues. And when you don't have communication, you have problems. I think it's 65% of medical errors in the hospitals happen because of basic communication issues. Someone assumed that someone knew something, and it all comes down to just being open and talking. We need more of this.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think we did a pretty good job of covering all the topics that we wanted to talk about. I was wondering if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about your book and what you talk about in 7 Summits.
Yeah, the book, I didn't even think about writing a book, but when I did a blog on Mount Everest, I was the only person that year that had a blog. And I blogged with people all over the world. Before I went to Mount Everest, I was lining myself up to be the first nurse in the world to do it. USA Today, which is a publication, came out and interviewed me, did a whole spread on this guy trying to be the first nurse in the world to do what I had done. So my blog address was in their article. So as I started blogging from Mount Everest, I had people from all over the world that were blogging with me, which is kind of unique. They would send me questions. I would download their information at night while all my tent mates and friends were playing cards or doing whatever. I was typing up. I responded to everybody. Every person emailed me. I personally responded to them day in and day out. But when I got back from my trip, the dean in the College of Nursing said, "Patrick, we followed your blog. We listened to you. You didn't make it sound as scary as we thought it would be." And I said, "Well, that was intentional because my wife and my family were also following me." She said, "Well, you're back, you're alive. Write the story about it." So I wrote the story about it with the information from my blog, which was 750 pages of material. So in my book, I put a lot of student quotes in the book. It was really exciting. But the chapters in my book are basically how I've led my life. My chapters are balance, wellness, goals, attitude, potential, success, and legacy. Again, going back to what we've talked about in the last little bit, trying to find balance in life. Wellness, whether it's mental wellness, physical wellness, social wellness, goals. We should all establish goals in life, incrementally address those goals. I have goals in my iPhone for my athletics, for my academics. I have so many lists of goals. Attitude, always choosing a positive attitude. Potential, realizing that all of us have the potential to do anything we want as long as we put our minds to it. Success, all of us need to strive as much as we can for success. And the last chapter is legacy. You don't choose your legacy. We're living our legacy. Our legacy is what we're doing right now. The people that we're mentoring, the people that we're going out of our way to help, that's developing our legacy. So when you're my age, looking back on life, you're reflecting, have I done enough in life? What more can I do, kind of thing. Whereas at your stage, you're focused solely on where you're going, what you're doing. You're veering a little bit left, a little bit right to help other people or to extend yourself. So the beauty of the book and the beauty of writing that, the message that I sent was received by many people when I was a motivational speaker. Most people came up to me and said, we've heard that before, but we need to hear it again. So I think all of us need to hear that again. The things we've discussed, establish goals. I mean, we know we should have goals, but we need to be selfish in a good way and treat ourselves when we accomplish those goals. We know we need to strive for success, but we know that the more we strive for success, the better things we can do in life and the more doors will open for us. So it's all things we've heard, but we need to hear again. And if we hear them again, we'll keep doing them.
And I also think hearing them from people with kind of diverse experiences and I guess like unique experiences that are memorable really helps us internalize what we're hearing again. A lot of these things we've spoken with our previous speakers. One of them was a general surgeon. He finished training in India and then kind of left that entire career behind. And he mentioned a lot of the same things. But hearing it from you who've done all these incredible things and hearing it from him who has this unique story, I think it really helps us internalize and like take it to heart.
I think any of you could be anywhere you want to be. Any one of you could be that surgeon. Any one of you can be that mountain climber that I am. When I've been interviewed many times, written up in many articles and magazines and books for a lot of the things that I've done. But when people ask me, what is the most important thing you've done in your life? People always think it's going to be the 7 summits and summiting Mount Everest. And I never say that. I always say that the most important thing I did in my life was creating the timeout process. So when I was on the National Board of Operating Room Nurses many, many years ago, we were having a lot of wrong site surgeries. People coming in for surgery on the left leg, we accidentally would do it on the right leg. And it was because of errors. We flipped the x-ray, we didn't read the chart, a whole lot of things were happening. So we actually reached out to the FAA and we realized that aviation weren't having that many mistakes. And we wanted to be where they were at, even though you hear of a big plane crash, but it doesn't happen very often. But what we found out was they were using checklists. Pilots use checklists. Even though they've flown the plane thousands of times, they use a checklist. So we learned from the FAA in the operating room to start using checklists. But we also learned that to make sure we didn't create a mistake, we needed to do a timeout. So we implemented the timeout process where right before the surgeon, he or she makes their initial incision, the circulator, who's the nurse in the room, goes, okay guys, timeout. Do we have the correct patient, having the correct procedure on the correct site? So when we rolled that program out over 15, not quite 20 years ago, I was so proud. I was on the national board. We had to fight, struggle with the American College of Surgeons. We had to fight, struggle with the College of Anesthesiologists, with the CRNAs, with everybody. Everybody had a piece of the pie to put this measure in place. But when it happened, I called my mom in Canada and I said, Mom, this is so cool. I'm part of a national movement that's going to save lives of people that I'll never meet. And I say that because I'm just a small town farm boy from Canada that lay in a field, looked at planes flying overhead, dreamed of worlds that I never thought I'd be in, and then did it. So any one of us can do anything you want to do and make huge changes just by being driven by a passion to make a difference in someone else's life.
All right, Dr. Hickey, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else you'd like to share? I guess more about your book, any websites, or anywhere that listeners can learn more about you and your journey?
Well, most recently I've started a podcast, which is kind of exciting. Did a little bit of research, a couple of months of research on how to do a podcast, and at the age of 70, I launched it just a week ago, and it's called International Service Learning, Experiential Medical Education, and it's available on Spotify and Apple and all your other areas where you get your podcast. But the neat thing about the podcast that I'm excited about is I'm allowing students that have been on medical mission trips to share the passion that they had on that trip. And we don't see that passion. Again, going back to what I said probably multiple times during our talk, passion trumps everything, and we don't hear enough of people's passions. So I'm humbled. I've done 15 or 16 episodes already. They're just being launched. And I hear this passion from kids 15 years ago that are now accomplished doctors or surgeons, and they go back to this trip. This trip was what made me want to become a doctor. This trip was what made me want to get into healthcare. And we don't see that. You don't see that on an Instagram post or a Facebook picture, but when you hear it on a podcast, it's huge. I'm excited. I hope that a lot of people that are listening, that are on the fence about a future career in healthcare, will hear that passion and want that passion and go down that road. And if I can change one person's path in life, that's huge. I mean, when I started teaching, and when I went to grad school, and my advisor said, well, Patrick, what do you want to do for your research, for your thesis? I said, save the world. She said, let's narrow that down a little bit. So we've narrowed it down a little bit, but I've realized you can't save everybody, you can't help everybody. But along the way, if we focus on just helping one person at a time, we can make a huge difference in life, because that one person is going to go out and help a couple other people.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So the way we typically end these episodes, I usually find a quote that's related to what we've talked about and stick it in here. But I was wondering if there were any quotes that you'd like to share from your book or from what you've heard to finish this episode up.
Yeah, well, you didn't prepare me for that, but but that's good.
We could cut it too.
Oh, that's good. Actually, I've got the book with me, and right in the beginning is a dedication. I guess it was me that dedicated the book. I said, to our present and future nursing heroes of healthcare, may you all be the patient advocates that our public so desperately needs. I think it's a great way to summarize our talk about people extending themselves to help other people.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, let's leave you with the quote to remember this episode by. This is one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, an American author and humorist. He says, "The two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why." Until next time, stay productive, stay positive, and keep climbing your inner peaks. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.